Hello, we are recording. Welcome back. So this is the third video of our Bridal Paradigm series, otherwise known as the Bride of Christ. It's really looking at the fact that Jesus' idea of the identity of the church is one of those central ideas is that we're a bride, but more importantly, when he talks about that, he is stating that he's the groom. And that's where we get the identity from. Obviously, that would make sense, so I don't need to explain it. So, if you have arrived here and you're like, okay, that sounds interesting, go back to part 1. So, this will be at least 6 parts. We've got about 6 hours of teaching, so it's quite juicy. If you've seen a previous video, you'll know we've covered stuff that you would have never heard before. If you're familiar with the bridal paradigm, it's like, wow, this is kind of crazy stuff. So the craziness of it is understanding what a Jewish wedding was. So we kind of have taken a simple approach to how we are doing this. So the approach I've taken, which isn't necessarily the right one. So basically, we're looking at the Hebrew wedding, because obviously none of us understand that. None of us understand when Jesus is referring to the different stages when he's teaching, and the same with the apostles, and even in the Old Testament. So the approach we took is to disprove that there's nothing in the New Testament about the bridal paradigm. So we've part 1 and 2, we've covered the New Testament only, so we've covered various parts. In this part and the next part, we'll cover the Old Testament. We'll look a little bit about the traditions, particularly with Passover. We're going to introduce the festivals and how that works. And then in part 5 and 6, which might just be part 5, it won't be actually. I already know it'll be beyond an hour. So part 5 and 6 will be looking at the traditions a bit more and digging into some of the stuff. So, for instance, we're going to mention the mikveh, and we're going to mention the huppah, which you don't know what that is. And we're not going to discuss really what that is, so we're going to leave that part 5 and 6 when we're going to go into the finer details. So as I said, go back to part 1 if you haven't seen any of this before. It might be a bit confusing because we're obviously doing a series. If you've been listening to the series, welcome back. It's great to discuss this more. It is important. It is really important. I hope we all, what we're listening now, realise that. And there's so much to it we don't really know and understand, even from looking at scripture. That's the idea. We're pulling that out. So this is a series called The Big Lie, which is looking at 2 things: truth, the scriptures, and the lies that are propagated or manufactured or just told, what we believe in the world. So we're going to begin our first lie focus video. So it's going to be, to me, it's a delicate subject. It's controversial. I don't necessarily want to do it, but it goes kind of hand in hand with looking at the truth. See it a bit like a man walking. So it's fine sucking up all this and soaking up all this truth from the Bible, but it's got to mean something in our real lives. And actually, there's a lot of fabrication, let's say, going on in the world, and that has been for years. I'm aware, just particularly with political stuff, that stuff started to come out beginning of last year about some of the things we believe that aren't true. So the first video is on the Russiagate Scandal. That's its official name. That is the idea that Trump basically bought the 2016 election. So it's a long time ago with the help of Russia, but he knew what they were doing and he was involved in it. That has recently proved to be a hoax. I wasn't planning to do that as a video, but it just so happened, kind of in the planning of this, that I have come across a video by Russell Brand. And the strange thing is, Russell Brand, politically, so he's the kind of comedian, actor guy, now a bit of a social activist / commentator, particularly on YouTube. He's left politically, he was like commenting on a report. So we're kind of commenting on what he has had to say. And it's quite interesting. I think some of what he actually says is really quite profound in the way it discusses what the implications are for our society and for our culture and for this generation, which we kind of is the point of doing that in the first place. Hence, we kind of like, I came across a video and it's like, oh, well, we've got to do this. So that video will be out by the time this video comes out. I've already done it. It's actually online. So you should be able to, with everything else, just go back to this channel and everything's nicely subdivided, or it should be there. There's not that much there. It's kind of bits and bobs I've done in the past, but you should be able to find it. There's links as well in the box. I'm also going to transcribe the slides and put them online if you want to. So you can then take them away and use them for however you want to use them if you find this stuff interesting. If you don't. I think that's kind of drawing up everything at the moment. So, slide number 1. So that's basically what I've already discussed. So we'll just whiz through it. So part 1 and 2, the previous 2 parts, we've begun to see that this bridal paradigm is foundational to Scripture in the Church. We've looked at 4 critical stages of the traditional Hebrew wedding that I mentioned in the New Testament. We can't say how foundational the bridal paradigm is, as we have not the understanding of what those stages are, because we don't know the wedding. We don't know how someone in that culture, Jewish culture or Hebrew culture, would have got married. So if I ask you to guess what they are, this is the point. You could guess and be right, but it's still a guess. You don't know. So that whole idea of soaking up truth, and then understanding that as a process that should go through, and then understanding when Jesus is talking anything about marriage, that's what he's referring to, because that's what marriage would have been. It's nothing like our marriage, but the revelation is his wedding. So when he's talking, it's always important to remember what he's saying is he's talking about his wedding. And Paul in Ephesians 5 restates the same idea. I'm not talking about what you think I'm talking about, which is a wedding, a Jewish wedding. I'm talking about the bride of Christ. And he uses kind of flowery language. Basically, it's a kind of divine mystery, but that's the mystery. So part 3 and 4, we're going to continue on through the other stages. So this is going to be all New Testament stuff. Right, so this is the whole outline. So we've covered some of it. As I said, we're kind of doing it in 3 different parts: New Testament, Old Testament, tradition. So the highlight bits are the bits we've done from the New Testament. The unhighlighted. You can see there's a lot there. So it's not actually simple to break it down into 7 stages. So how do we do that? Well, we compare the festivals. So we'll discuss that in a bit. So there's 7 stages of the wedding. There's 7 festivals. There's 7 lots in the Bible, but actually the festivals themselves are spring and fall. And as we'll see, there's a big break between the spring and fall, because obviously they're not in the summer. There's 3 months at least between the end of spring and the beginning of fall, so there's a gap. There's a gap as well in the preparation. If you see that stage 4 preparation. So the spring refers to the first coming and the second coming. All this stuff foreshadows Jesus. At the time, it's future. Now it's the spring are past and the fall are future. So it's not as simple as just dividing to stages. We don't want to really get caught up in that. I think a very kind of Western way of thinking, actually what we're kind of trying to do is understand the Bible doesn't think like us even. The kind of thinking of that culture is very, very different. So like the truth's not revealed, this is what we're saying. The truth's not revealed just because we know that the preparation is stage 4, or it could be stage 3. What we need to understand is the order and what they're saying about Jesus. That's the most important part. So there is a lot of stuff like stage 2 and 3. I think it's easy to get confused and understand. For instance, we put the 2 festivals, unleavened bread and first fruits or Shavuot, which is Sinai, at Sinai, in the same. It's easy to kind of we could put them in either, basically. That's what I'm saying. I'm losing my train of thought, sorry. So it's difficult to distinguish what's second and what's third, or even if some of the stuff in the first is actually in the second stage. But that's not so important. What we need to do is understand that there are 7 stages in the order, and then what it's saying about Jesus, and what that's saying about us. We don't even have to use broad language if we don't want to. That's kind of missing the point. Unless we'll find out there is a lot of broad language in the Bible. So that's it. So these are the days. So the point of this is to just show you kind of simply that they're very closely bunched together. So some of them are days, some of them are weeks. Actually, I found it quite confusing trying to decipher some of it and what's what and the dates. Because the whole thing, the Jewish calendar works very different from ours. But they're all there from the previous slide. You can go back, stop the video, refer back to them if you want. We're not really going to discuss this. So what's important to say is the days in how they work in Jewish thinking. So if we see Genesis, it's day 1, there's night and day, day 2, night and day, and it's repeated. And actually, you read it and you don't actually pick this up. That's in the wrong order. But that's how, in the culture, that's a day. A day starts at night and ends before the end of the night. So as soon as the sun goes down, a new day begins, and as soon as the twilight ends, the light ends, that day ends, and then obviously the sun is down, and then it's a new day. That's how it works. So actually, the days in terms of hours are different. Sort of, even if it's like milliseconds, or I mean, I wouldn't know because I haven't looked at that at all. But obviously, the length of light in a day differs from day to day. So the whole timing is then a bit kaput. It's one of the peculiarities of this kind of way of thinking. So ours is very time orientated, and an Eastern or traditional view, which would include Hebrew Eastern thinking, is not time orientated. So it's a big difference. So I think that's it. So what we have prophetically, we have a match with this idea of the Messiah as a bridegroom and his people as a bride. That includes God, actually. God as a groom. And then how that's described is through the wedding ceremony and the Jewish festivals. So it's a threefold court thing. So that's obviously taken from Ecclesiastes about wedding. It's saying that God's involved in the wedding. It's not just a man and a woman, or 2 people, a couple. It is God who's also at the centre of the marriage. That's what we're saying here. This kind of idea repeats throughout the Bible, and we'll see why in a bit. So if we look at that idea, that the entire Bible is about redemption. So the Messiah is that Redeemer. We recognise as Christians that Messiah is Jesus. Therefore, his coming, what he'll do again. So we have Gospels that's coming on Messiah, and the 2 witnesses to state what Jesus is doing. Again, at the time, it's foreshadowing. In our time, it's what Jesus has done and what he's going back to do. And those 2 witnesses are the bridal paradigm and I put the bridal paradigm is really the Jewish wedding, 7 stages of Jewish wedding, and the 7 Jewish festivals. And again, they foreshadow what Jesus is going to do. So there's this idea in the Deuteronomy that we're not going to really get too involved in. It just states us for something to be legally witness, there need to be 2 witnesses. Or just 1 witness is inconclusive. And this is a theme repeated throughout the Bible, even the New Testament. And this is what we have. So what we're saying is the fact that the wedding talks about Jesus and the Moedim talk about Jesus, and they come together and talk about the same thing, Jesus is the Messiah, and they say what the Messiah will do, is that witness. And Moedim just simply is the Jewish phrase for festivals. That actually means gathering. doesn't mean festivals at all. So this is kind of the idea. So throughout these kind of videos, these talky things I'm doing, teaching, if you want to call that, I wouldn't necessarily say this is juju. If you want to call it teaching, it's teaching. I'm going to pose these challenges. So the point of these challenges is to make you think, because we want to think as well while we're doing this. And the question is important. The answer is up to you. So I'm not going to tell you what to think. I'll tell you what I think. But it's up to you, and there is no right answer. So the idea is we're beginning to understand truth more. We can then take these things away and think a bit more deeply about them, and we can kind of think, put them down, come back to them when we've learned a bit more, pick them up, think about it a bit more, put it down, and then just doing that repeatedly, the more we learn, actually we begin to question what we presume to be the right answer. So the answer is really evolving. So this really is, because these Moedim, these 7 Jewish festivals talk and they prophesy and they foreshadow Jesus, should we as Christians, should the church celebrate them as they're biblically laid out by tradition? So tradition, yes, but biblically, do we celebrate them traditionally like Jews? Maybe not. I would say it depends if we want to celebrate them or not. Or for me, it's if they're in the Bible. I would more be more inclined to say yes, that if we're going to celebrate it, we should keep it biblical in the tradition. Maybe not. Maybe. I mean, it depends on what we're celebrating. So I think we should, because they witness Jesus. So a couple of issues with that. So you're going to ask me, do I? No, I don't. Why? Because I don't really understand them, so I've got no pattern to celebrate. It's one of the things with Judaism, it's very secret. What they do, how they practice their religion, is very inclusive to being a Jew. They don't really talk. And obviously, they don't. There's no evangelism system in Judaism like there is in Christianity. Really, for me, I'd celebrate them on my own, which is a bit pointless. Which is the idea of gathering. We gather in a group. That's kind of a cultural thing, or part of culture in the world, and doing it together we understand. So the question really is, should we be doing that? So, although we said there's 7 stages, they're kind of broken down into these 3 terms. So you've got matchmaking, betrothal, and marriage. So within the 7, there's 3. So that's just the terms. We're going to use a lot of Jewish terms. And at some point we're going to introduce some Jewish stuff, particularly language stuff, which will be really simple. So that's the idea there is very simple. Like, I think we're kind of at a critical point in time that's kind of hard to discuss way simply. If you look at the history of the church from Luther, so Luther's an interesting character on its own in this context. It's like things have been restored. I think one of the things that's yet to be restored to churches are Jewishness. So the reason we don't know all this stuff is because it's all been forgotten. Why has it been forgotten? Because the church has lost its roots. It's become too westernized. Therefore, when all this stuff's in the Bible and Jesus is talking about it, then we don't understand what he really is talking about because we've lost our roots. So the point then is, I mean, that I think we proved that doesn't need to be debated. The point then is, if we believe that, then what else have we lost? The festivals. Do we go for saying we should be practicing Torah? I mean, it kind of opens a whole can of worms, but particularly the Jewish language is critical to understanding what the Bible says, because obviously, if you believe classically what we're told to believe, that obviously the Old Testament is pretty much entirely, apart from a few bits, which are Aramaic, Hebrew in the Old Testament. The New Testament's Greek. Now, if you translate the New Testament in Hebrew, it makes perfect sense from a cultural point of view. They're thinking in Hebrew, not Greek, which is quite challenging at this moment. So if they find that too challenging, don't worry about it. But we're going to kind of uncover that idea. So, well, if we look at the Old Testament, what can we draw out of it, and how can we learn about what the Bible is actually saying by understanding just a simple Jewishness, understanding the Jewish culture. And actually, we'll look at some verses later that do exactly that in the New Testament, in the context of this marriage ceremony. We're going to look at the verse and say, oh, it's kind of far more obvious to us now that what's being talked about is a marriage ceremony. We just wouldn't have realised it at the time. So critically for us, I mean, it's going to be a long journey. This journey I've been on for years. I kind of bumped into it and it's like, wow, this is kind of interesting. So the whole idea for me biblically comes from learning the language and understanding the language and how the language works. And as we'll see, that's really important. So you've got the arranging stage. So you've got this Jewish term, Shiddukin. The way we transliterate is not very good sometimes. That's mathematically probably 95% right. That KH is a bit of a weird one. That's not really in Hebrew. But there you go. And the first one's got a double D and the second one's got a single D. That's probably my misspelling actually, but there you go. So the point is, this process is timely, it's costly, and it involves a lot of waiting, which is about coming of age, maturing. So just this idea of a wedding being arranged is unsavoury in a Western mentality. So yeah, it is in our mentality. So we then kind of got to pick out the bones and not throw the baby out of the bowl of water. How we do that in this context is we actually understand it, and it's like, actually it's not savoury, so just bear that in mind. We're gonna unpick that in the fourth video. Yes. So we got the door, knock at the door. So we're just gonna go through the stages, and we might quickly look over some stuff. So the groom with the groom's father goes to the bride-to-be's house that they want to propose, not betroth. They want to propose, begin the betrothal stage. That's what they want to do. So they knock on the door. If the door's not answered, it's rejected. If it's open, then basically formal negotiations will begin, as we'll see. So I just found this interesting. This is from something I picked up from Wikipedia. So Wikipedia, for what we're looking at, is not going to be the greatest. But it's just the fact, in Jewish culture, this is regarded as the sanctification stage. So the point is the bride becomes sanctified for her purpose, which is an exact replica. And this is the whole thing. We're looking at the ceremony and we're saying, right, this is a direct pointing to our relationship with Jesus, who we are and what he is. So this is the whole point then is, if that's true, we're supposed to be sanctified and dedicated to the groom. There's a contract that's negotiated called the ketubah. So that's a fairly good transliteration. I'm not going to keep using that word, by the way. So first Jewish words in the Jewish language in our slides. Within that, we got the bridal price, which is called the mohar, and the gifts called the matan. Again, a bit offensive ideas. So we would presume the mohar is dowry, and it kind of is, but it isn't. So the mohar there. So Hebrews read right to left. So you've got a mem, which is an M, and then you read it across, and you've got another M. You can see it's the same. So that is what we call modern Hebrew. Strange name for something ancient. It's because it's not really that ancient, which will give you a clue to why you might want to go with that. If it is, then what is something different? So anyway, mohar and matan. So the stage is sealed by the betrothed couple sharing wine. We covered this when Jesus is in the Lord's Supper. They don't drink the same wine together until they go through all the stages. So a typo by me there. So they don't in fact see each other until the flowing, the fifth stage. So there's kind of messages sent back and forth, which we'll cover. So, which cover in a later time. So, matchmaking, covenantal meal. So, a wedding is always arranged by families. So, we kind of, because we don't understand this, we miss verses like this. So, it seems to us that we're not going to go through the verse. It's short anyway. But Samson saying, "Oi, I want that woman for my wife," in a strange Western accent, which he didn't use at the time, but it sounds a bit like that. That's what it does. It's like, it's a bit bizarre, but we're kind of missing the point, which is, what is the point? So the point is, the wedding is always arranged by families. So basically, Samson sees a woman he fancies, he wants to marry her. He can't just marry her, because that's not the tradition of the culture they live in. It's the parents that arrange the marriage. So he has to go to his parents and say, "I have seen this woman, I fancy her, I want to marry her. Can you go and arrange that marriage for me, please?" He misses the please, obviously. So there's a knocking at the door again, and the various phrases for the matchmaker, Shiddukin, so that there is, and Shiddukin. So yeah, it does have both have a double D in it. Does it have a double D in it? Yes, it does actually. So that's a shin and a dalet for the shirt and the dirt. Yeah, so we won't go into too much detail about this, but it's good to introduce a few things in terms of understanding the Jewish language. So we see the first matchmaker in the Bible is God with Adam and Eve. We're going to look at that later in another video. As stated previously, this isn't arranged between families, so that's the point. God's the first matchmaker, and he arranges the marriage between Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve don't get to choose. God basically makes Eve for Adam, presents her, this is your wife, and that's the way it works. So there's this idea of I call it etymological ideas, but it's kind of the first found would be another way of phrasing it. So etymological just means the way something is understood the first time it's found and in the Bible. So it works with ideas and it works with words. So the first time you find a word in the Bible defines what it is. Now you can go through the Bible and uncover the revelation of what it is more, but it doesn't move away. It doesn't morph, or what's a good word? What's a good scientific word? It doesn't change. It doesn't contradict. It doesn't suddenly change its DNA and become something else, which is the idea of science. It's actually, that's an idea in the Bible, so that idea is contradicted by the Bible before it's even an idea. Evolution is the word I'm looking for. So things don't evolve, they are, and we can change the way they are, understanding of the way they are, but it doesn't change the basic principle of how it's defined. It's still always defined by the same thing. So because God is the first matchmaker, it's a very Jewish idea as well. Because God's the first matchmaker, and he's matchmaking is marriage, that's always the way predefined in the scripture that marriage begins with the father matchmaking for his son. It all fits. Bridal paradigm, this is the model, this is what happened, this is what Jesus and God then therefore do the same thing. So basically got our bridal paradigm or our wedding, it's been arranged, it's arranged by God for his son. And you see that in Genesis 1:1 actually in the beginning. If you understand what's actually being said and the ideas behind, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So we'll look at the story later in Genesis 4. So there's a covenantal meal. So there's covenantal meals all over the place in Scripture, and there's a good reason for that. So particularly the covenantal meal in this first stage, which is why we're covering it, and the Passover, include cups of wine. So this foreshadows the Lord's Supper, where we go back to Jesus saying, Jesus is referring back to both covenantal meals, and they foreshadow the marriage supper of the Lamb. So there's now two cups in kind of New Testament theology, and those two cups are foreshadowed by 2 cups in the wedding ceremony. So the first one's here, and there's also Passover. So going back to what Jesus said, we've already seen that. So states to disciples, they will not taste that wine again, one of the cups, until they are with him in his Father's kingdom. Another one of the 4 cups. So that first cup is the Lord's Supper. The second cup is the marriage of the Lamb. In between is that preparation stage that we'll come into. So interestingly, Israel's Sinai experience foreshadows our preparation before we reach our promised land, and that's where a lot of the festival stuff comes in. Probably grab more out of that foreshadowing of Israel's Sinai experience and our journey of preparation. So obviously it's a journey of preparation, that's the point. And we get more from the festivals than the marriage, probably, if we look solely at that, but we're not looking at that later. We'll actually look at that later. We'll look at the book of Exodus and begin to unravel some stuff there, because it's all, we're wanting to focus on truth, but also truth of our season we're in, which is why we're looking at lies again. Anyway, that's for later. So there are basically 4 cups at Passover. So these, I mean, you probably won't know this, and if you would have heard it preached, you'd heard it preached badly, because it actually refers to not just Passover, but it refers to the wedding ceremony, which we've already discovered we don't really know anything about. So the 4 cups represent the 4 expressions of deliverance promised by God, Exodus 6:6. So you could say this, as a Jewish festival, is tradition. Well, actually, tradition is based on something in the Bible. So these 4 I wills, so I will bring out, which we're going to look at these 4 I wills. I will deliver, I will redeem, and I will take. It's part of the ketubah. It's part of the marriage contract, which God is outworking. Yehovah, or Yud Hey Vav Hey, however you want to say it. If you want to use a Jewish context, is outworking in the book of Exodus. Again, that's why we're going to look at the book of Exodus. So there's a cup of sanctification. So this is at the first we talked about from previous slides, the acceptance of formal proposal. There's a cup of judgment. Now it appears to be missing, but it's not. We're going to cover it later. The cup of redemption. So big secret coming out. It will kind of shock you and illuminate you to find out what it is. The cup of redemption, which is the mohar, paid by the groom, and the cup of praise, the celebration at the wedding ceremony. So these 2 sanctification and redemption cups, I think I'm correct in thinking, I mean, even I don't know too much about this, ironically, that they'll come quite close together. So we'll come on to the mohar in a bit, and then the celebration, which foreshadows the marriage of the Lamb in Revelation. So this is just an interesting bit. So trying to think this through and understand it, and go, okay, missing cup. But it made me think about what happens at a modern Jewish wedding, which is traditional, not biblical. So they smash a wedding glass. So is it symbolic of a missing cup? Because it's the cup of judgment, it gets smashed. So the Bible reference would be about Jesus. He crushed for our iniquities. You can see where we're going with this cup of judgment from Isaiah 53:5. So they basically smashed, and it's kind of the whole idea of this whole thing is celebration, but post the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, there is no temple. So this is the bit where they stop celebrating and they mourn, and this is the symbolism in that. And it's the same. If you want a clue, it's the same for us. So we're going to look at the 4 cups. So I will bring out. So this is the word Yatzah. So let's go into some Hebrew stuff now. We've said we're going to unpack it. So it's just simpler to do it bit by bit, and then to do it properly at the proper time. So if I'm English and I'm transliterating, that's how I would spell it. Yatzah. Okay. It's not really correct. It's a different way of thinking. So if we want to learn anything Hebrew, we have to unlearn our learning and then learn something different. about how something works. So in this case, it's how the English language works compared to the Hebrew language. So we say the English language works like this, we transliterate, and it doesn't always turn out good or even correct. We don't get the full truth because the way the English language works compared to the Hebrew language, different rules. So when the rules basically contradict, we're going to end up with something that's wrong. So YATSA, so you can see there's stuff going on in that Hebrew word. So basically what's happening is this, there are 3 Hebrew letters written down, and the way you would say it, we would say would be pronouncing 4 words. See, even I get confused. So we're pronouncing 4 words. So what's going on? Because we've got 5 words there. So the written down and spoken Hebrew. So you don't write down all the letters you speak. So it's what we call vowel points, which aren't actually vowel points. Some of the letters written down can be vowel points. Often they're not. So what's underneath is the vowel point, and that's the vowels. So whenever you see that under, so if you see anything under a Hebrew word, it's always a vowel point. Vowel points can also be above a Hebrew word, and they can be in the middle of a Hebrew word. Just trying to think on my feet, because I've put this in the slides. Thank you, Tim. Good job that. Anyway, let's not curse me too much because I'm cursing myself. Anyway, back to the video. So yeah, bunny hop. So when it's below, it's always an A or an E. If it's not below, it's not an A and an E. Basically, that's the simplest way I can say it. So because it's below, we know that's an A. We know it's an A or an E. So the line means A. So just to confuse you even more, so let's just review that. And I am trying to help you understand, because we are going to look at this stuff a bit more and draw out what it means. So basically, in our understanding, the vowels aren't written. Okay, if it's under, it's an A and an E, and if it's this is the vowel points. If it's under the letter written, so we've got a Yod, Sadi, and an Aleph there, which is where we get the Yod's actually, that's not where we get the A, which is even more confusing. I've just kind of shown you it is confusing. It's more different than we think it could be, even if we know nothing. So the line's an A. Okay, so out the A and the E, it's a A. If it's dots, it's an E. Depending on the number of dots, I think changes things in some rules, which is why we're using this example, because it's a good example. Now, there's a difference between biblical Hebrew and modern, in sort of the Hebrew they speak today. So the Hebrew they speak today and they write today, and it's the same, but they don't use exactly the same vowel points. So the vowel points in the Bible, so again, the vowel point is under the letter. It's this T looking symbol, so it's under. The vowel points are divided into long vowels and short vowels. And the short vowel in the Bible is just A. The T is a double A. So rather than pronounce it A, pronounce it A. So Hebrew today, they dispense with that idea, so they dispense with long vowels. Because really, what's the point? And I guess there must be a point if you keep trying to learn and understand between one and the other. But you can understand what word is from what someone says, whether it's short vowel or long vowel. So for that reason, it's not really needed, simply. But anyway, so it's not a double A sound, a pronunciation, sorry, of the first two vowels. So what's the missing piece of the puzzle there? I'll tell you in a minute. You should have picked it up. You probably won't because it's complicated. So you pronounce the word first and then the vowel under it. So all Hebrew, pretty much, there's one exception, which is a weird AE pronunciation, or EA, one of the two. So anyway, there is one exception, but apart from that, every Hebrew word written down and spoken with the vowel points is consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant. Now, sometimes at the end there's a vowel. Sorry, there's a vowel after the consonant. Sometimes there isn't. So it's we talk about three-letter roots. So it's a three-letter root. It's three letters written and a vowel between them. So it's consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant. Now sometimes it's consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. But it's pretty simple to understand. So we understand that's an A. So a yod, it's just a Y sound. Yeah, sadi, which is a bit strange. So it's the TS. So when we look at the TS, we'd assume that they're separate letters. They're not. Sadi is a kind of Z, but it's pronounced Z. So you can just hear the similarity with a Z. It's a Z. The letter's called Sadi. And then A, and then Aleph, which you don't pronounce. So it's a peculiarity in Hebrew that you don't pronounce the Aleph. The letters represent things which we won't talk about, because that will shock you. It will shock you because if it represents something, you get the meaning of the word from what letters it has. So the Aleph, it represents God. It's the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So when Jesus says, "I am the Alpha and the Omega," a Jew would, or someone who speaks Hebrew would interpret that as, "I am the Aleph and the Tav." So the Aleph is God. So he's basically stating he's God, and this is how we get deeper meaning of understanding this, which is why we're going to talk about it. We're not just going to talk about it. We're going to look at the scripture to draw that deeper meaning out. That for me is the simple reason why we want to understand Hebrew. You get used to it, it's pretty simple. So just to review, you've got a yod, sadi, and an aleph. Those letters mean something. So for instance, aleph, you can go away and read Hebrew and actually find the word aleph written down as a word. You can do it with yod and you can do it with sadi. Most of the letters in the Hebrew alphabet you can actually go away and find in the Bible the way they're said. But for us, an A is just an A, a B is just a B, a C doesn't exist, a D is a D. But in Hebrew, it's Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. I don't know all my Hebrew alphabet in order, so I won't continue. But Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. So Yatsa. So the way I'm reading it, so I'm dropping the Aleph because it's unspoken. I'm just adding the vowel points. Yatsa. So it once you get it, it's pretty simple. To this word, go back to the point. So this, bring out, the first cup, I will bring out. This is a word used 2 times in Genesis 1 and once in Genesis 2. This is kind of why I'm highlighting this here, because we're going to bring out the real meaning of what bring out means. So again, Genesis 1 is mentioned twice, and in Genesis 2 is mentioned once. So it's mentioning creation. So what does it mean in that context? We talked about etymological. The first time something's mentioned in the Bible, a particular word, but also an idea, because words define things. It's really important. So this is the first time. So it's using creation. It means more than we'd assume it does. So it refers to kind of flourishing, growth, and blossoming of a plant. So it's not just the bringing out, it's the bringing out into something. It's the purpose. Hebrew is very purpose driven. So the purpose of the word in doing something is to do something. So the point of taking something and bringing it out is to change something about it to do with its environment. So you move it from one place into another. So a plant, in that case, is brought out of the earth or out of the soil, and it begins to blossom, and it starts by shooting. We see a shoot appear out of the ground. That's an interesting word in itself. Question: guess for me in the comments what the Hebrew word for ground is, and what the three-letter root is. What does it relate to? You can read Genesis, actually, find the first time ground's mentioned. It will tell you. So you don't really have to understand the kind of dynamics of it, even. So anyway, come out and then some simply also means exit, as in Exodus. So God says he will bring out. So he's bringing them out of Egypt, but into the promised land. So the problem with that in this context is they have to go through another process in Sinai, which is the preparation. We talked a little bit about that before, we mentioned it anyway. So from a Western perspective, you say, has God brought them out of Egypt? Yes. From a Hebrew perspective, you say, has God brought them out of Egypt? No, because the point of bringing them out is that they get into the promised land. That's the only reason they're brought out, to get into the promised land. So it's a different way of understanding. Exit as in Exodus, though that's not the Hebrew term used. So the Hebrew names of books of the Old Testament, so it's called Shemot. Basically, we won't go into that. It basically is names. Anyway, that's the first one. So the etymological meaning, I haven't put this on the first slide. Delivering, freeing from control. Now, when you interpret Hebrew words this way, most of the time they have between 3 and 6 meanings. Sometimes they have more, sometimes they have less. They're usually not this straightforward, but they sometimes are. So the word is that sound. So let's just review that, because we introduced this idea. So let's stop there. Let's go back with the Hebrew. Hebrew is very difficult to speak, less difficult to read, simple to understand. Yeah. So if we actually want to use it as a language, we're going to struggle. So actually introducing you to some of the more struggly things, but when we understand them, they're simple. Again, we have to understand they don't work. Like, so it's a 3-letter word in Hebrew. It's just written 3 letters. 5 letters. There's no aleph, so we're not dropping. So you've got the difference between the vowel under, so you know both of those vowels are A. So traditionally biblical Hebrew, that's a long A and a short A. And again, in today, ways Hebrew spoke, there is no long short, there's just a simple A. So that sound, or that sound, would be a probably better way of pronouncing it, though probably is incorrect. So you've got a nun, a sadi again on the head. So that's pretty simple. Again, right to left. So this has a simple meaning, etymological, delivering or freeing from control. Freedom, we might say. So God is a bringer outer, he is a rescuer. He's a deliverer. Third one, redeem. The third cup is redeem. So Gaal. So again, you've got exactly the same. This is partly why I think this is a good idea to introduce this now, the vowel point, because they're all the same. They're all A, so they all have that line under them. Yeah, that's right. I was just checking that before I screwed that up. So, etymological meaning, release or purge. So it's more than the idea of bringing out of something into something. It's taking something out of them, out of something, when you redeem it. That, in this context, holds it back, so you release it from that person. So redeem from existing danger, ransoming, avenging. Pollution, require cleansing, redeem. And now if we understand the work of the cross, which is where we're going to with this, redeem, these are all things Jesus did on the cross. So all facets of his redemption, of the act, in terms of the act of the cross being a redemption. So we're released or purged sin and death. We're redeemed from existing danger, which is not living, dying. Ransom, avenged. So it's paid for, bought for. It's not avenged, but that's another definition of ransoming. And the pollution, that sin, was cleansed. So God cleansed us of sin, and Jesus is the redeemer. Take, Lachesh, it's the same thing. Don't really need to say anything about that. We've covered all that. So Lamed, Gof, which is a bit confusing, and a Het, which is a bit confusing. So it's not really a Q, it's the way we transliterate. So there are two Ks. There's a KA and a KU, and that's all I'm going to say. So some Hebrew letters duplicate sounds previously of other Hebrew letters. And the Het is a funny one. So there are things called gutturals. Now, simply, guttural is this. Take a guttural, like a Het. What is it really? H. So say H, H. Now the H in Hebrew is Hey, which we haven't come across. But Het is different. So say H and then kind of restrict the air with your throat while you say H, and you get Het. Or a H sound. Rather than Hey, it's H. So it's pronounced H. So Lachesh. Lachesh. Yeah. So that's the difference. So it's kind of confusing when you when you read it. So like a guttural, well, not something else, but that's simply a guttural, and there are a handful of gutturals. I can't remember. At least 4, maybe 5 or 6 gutturals. The number doesn't matter. But the point is, they're a small number compared to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. But one of them is a Het, and it's pronounced Heh. Receive, take, etymological meaning. So receive, learning. So what we're saying there is, if that the etymological meaning is receiving, so we actually receive or take something from someone else, that's the etymological meaning. But then as the language develops and they go, well, what should we use for the word learn? Well, really we're receiving and taking something. That's how we understand learning. So it's the same process, so we're going to use the same word. At least how it's spelled, which we'll come on to another time. Marrying a wife. So those are the verses where in Genesis where that's used. For marrying a wife. Take. So in the context of what we're saying in Exodus 6, 6, 7. Take is, I will take you as my people and I will be your God. So it's directly being used. Take, that is, in context of the covenant. So the point is, these are primarily the 4 things Christ does on the cross for us. He brings us out of slavery, delivers us from the fruits of sin, including death, redeems us to God, so pairs our relationships. He takes us as his bride, which really is, in the context of what we're talking about, what's meant by I will take you as my people and I will be your God. It's a wedding vow, basically. We haven't realised that yet, but yeah, wedding talk. So the ketubah in the Bible. So ketubah simply means written down. Its root is writing. So we've looked at 3-letter Hebrew words as written down. So you can see again, ketubah between the vowels. Between the consonants there's a vowel. So that's a 4-letter Hebrew word. So ketub would be the root, which means writing, and ketubah would be written down. So you basically add another word onto a Hebrew root word and you get another word, and you go back to the meaning of that word. So that's simply how you begin to understand things. So everything relates to each other to some degree or another. Something is not separate. So we can't separately define what something is in the Bible, because that's not how the Hebrew language works. So it's not actually that complicated. For our purposes, for my purposes, we want to learn and understand how it works. We don't necessarily want to speak it or read it perfectly. We just have to understand it, understand what it's saying. So our purposes are those simple purposes, which is what I said before. Doing that is simple. So it's conditions like vows but legally binding. So the bride's estate and inventory, including the bride price, are included in the ketubah. So that H in ketubah, we'll go back to that, is a hey, which we mentioned relating to het. So it's another H sound. So it's a bit of duplicate, but kind of not. It's kind of duplicate of het is duplicate of hey, but it's not. And that's how Hebrew works as well. It kind of is and kind of isn't. That means it's not black and white. We tend to think we're black and white. Something can't be in the middle. Well, most things are in the middle, actually. We'll find out. So the bride's estate inventory, including the bride price. So the bride price, so the groom and the groom's family, the groom's father, pay a price for the bride. So that's a kind of dowry. Offensive, yes. So we'll uncover why that's not offensive later, mostly in the next video. But there are written down in the Torah, so we call it the law. It doesn't mean law at all. That's another Hebrew word. It means teaching. In the teachings in the law, if you want to put it that way, penalties for breaking some of the things to do with marriage. This is what all this bride price stuff is really about. It's about placing value and worth on people and not taking it away. So, for instance, in Deuteronomy 22, 28, 29, let's just say I'm a Jew, I'm not married. Let's just say I'm a Jew in the Exodus, I'm not married. I sleep with a maiden, just have sex with her. So the penalty for that would be 50 shekels of silver, which is about £1,600. So it's a lot of money. And I would pay that to the father. The father would then decide whether he wants me to marry his wife. Sorry, I can't marry his wife because he's not married. He will decide if he will allow me to marry his daughter, and I won't really have a say in it. It's kind of the seriousness of the whole issue of marriage, really. Now, he could quite rightly say, you've got to marry my daughter, and I'll have to marry her. I have no choice. Or he could quite rightly say, not letting you marry my daughter, and I'd want to. And I'll have to pay £1,600 for the benefit of having sex with her once. It's not really worth it, is it? So the mentality is about provision. It's not material value or ownership. It's what you're placing in terms of that provision on someone, or in terms of a penalty. What the penalty is about, what you're removing in terms of provision from someone else. So if I did that in that context, like I fornicated, basically would be a biblical, or basically had sex with her, I would be in the tradition of that day really changing that place for that woman in society and devaluing her, hence why I have to pay a penalty. So this is what this is all about. So if you don't quite understand that, don't worry, because we'll say, so the dowry and the gift, so there are actually two. It's not just about dowry. So dowry and the gift, not the value of the woman, but the value of the daughter to the family that's now lost, whose household duties as part of being a daughter. So the whole point of this is, so it's twofold. We'll look at that. We won't really discuss that at the moment. We will. But particularly this part. So the gift given rather than the dowry, for the bride, that is. So it's looking at a woman as a member of a family and what's lost in terms of provisions to the family financially, because they live in an agrarian society where everyone has to work to put food on the table, including the women who we think don't work. Well, they do work in that society, but she can no longer perform her duties in the house because she's no longer part of the house. She's part of her husband's house. So that's the reason. It also secures the bride, not enslaves her. So if we think that's the mentality, dowry, enslaving, it's not, and we'll see that in a bit. So just bear that in mind. So there's an inventory of the bridal estates, we said, the agreements between families, not individuals. So it's important to look at covenants, because covenants are basically, whether they're a covenant of marriage or not, because the whole thing about God and his people is about a wedding ceremony, the process is the same. So we can use different language, but the process is exactly the same. And that's what we're kind of showing. So the covenant between God and his people is a ketubah. This is the central theme of the kingdom, which is why it says, I will be your people and you will be my God. It's wedding talk. So this is the central theme of the kingdom and covenant. So the ketubah stipulates what God as a groom, so we can say the word God, or we can say the word groom, or we can even say the word Jesus, and in exchange we say the word bride, or we can say the word people. The language we choose isn't important, the same thing is going on. So the ketubah stipulates what God as a groom sacrifices for his bride, and what the bride gets out of it. The second part, what the people wants the bride sacrifice for the groom, and what the groom gets out of it. So it's a relationship, it's two-way. Again, you can use whatever language you want. The contract is a contract, it's the same thing. And there's two parts. It's what each person gets and what they have to give, what they have to sacrifice, which is an interesting idea. And these are the vows. We call them vowels, but they're not really vowels, but they're stipulated as a vow type thing within the ketubah, but there's more to it than just the ketubah, and this is a contract that's written down. So just know the language of God's covenant is as set out in the ketubah. It's marriage talk, so I've already said that, but it's worth re-highlighting. So this idea there's a New and an Old Testament. So we say the New is the Old revealed, and the Old is the New concealed. So this idea of foreshadowing, but actually there is one testament, and it actually fits together nicely. What we begin to understand is when we begin to understand things like marriage, we understand how it fits. It's not good to see it as two covenants. It's good to see it as two separate parts of the same thing, which is the Bible. So verse biblically wraps up in the idea that the contract between groom and bride, God and the people, is the Messiah. That's always been the way. So the difference is we recognise Jesus as the Messiah and the Jews don't, generally speaking. So the Old Testament view is Messiah to come, and the New Testament view is Messiah has come. So the really interesting things about what's revealed in the Jewishness of the Old Testament is it's very rich, but Jesus hasn't yet come. So all these people are writing down stuff by inspiration, and they're reading revelations by inspiration. So if you read Psalm 2, David's basically telling us he's seen the Messiah in heaven. It's like, wait a minute, you're a Jewish boy, and who's this Messiah chap, and how do you know he's the Son of God, and how do you get to heaven? It's kind of like, whoa. And this is the point of all this stuff in the Old Testament. So every Old Testament covenant God makes with Israel points to and foreshadows Jesus as Messiah. So we could go through it. Well, I've just put a few there. So Adam, Noah, Abraham, Israel, Sinai, which is the people in Sinai, and David. They all have these revelations of who Jesus is, and they all point to Jesus. Which is what much of the New Testament is about, particularly the letters. They're looking forward by looking back, and they're looking at what Christ has just done by looking way back into their own cultural history as a people of God. So the real biblical wedding story is this: if you join Old Testament and New Testament, this is something that's not really talked about. It is kind of the understanding we have to have. So God makes his covenant with Israel. I will be your God and you will be my people. And Israel then is the bride in that covenant. Israel then breaks the covenant. So obviously God's the groom. Effectively, Israel puts away God, or Yehovah. So Yod Heh Vav Heh. It's just the Jewishness, or the Jewish name, the God that actually, if I'm Jew, I can't say. So I broken the silly laws that they have. We're not going to discuss that, but that's one of the extra laws they put, which is why it's silly. And it also contradicts Old Testament prophecy when God says they will shout my name, or if you can't say God's name, then you certainly can't shout it. So that biblical prophecy is actually incorrect. Anyway, we won't get into that. Effectively, Israel puts away God. Now it's the men who put away the women. So who's the head? Who's the lead in that relationship, so to speak? It's not God, it's the people. People are deciding how the relationship goes. So they effectively do what is called putting away, which is the language of divorce. So God divorces Israel officially because she's been unfaithful, so legally, and then that's why the exile happens. Messiah comes, God makes the same covenant with the new bride. So basically the elements of the ketubah are exactly the same. They're no different. But what's different is spiritually the Gentiles are grafted into that covenant. That's always the point of the covenant anyway. That salvation, God's relationship with humanity, human beings, would extend bigger than Israel. It just never worked out. So that's done by the works of the cross, which is the ketubah vows. So this is the point of what we're coming on to and why it's not different. Because Jesus is making those vows and they are stipulated in the ketubah, which is why he has to die on the cross. It includes Israel by accepting the vows of the ketubah. So it's not really just about Jesus' blood, it's about the fact that as a vow is in the ketubah. And as Jesus lays out in the covenantal meal, the Lord's Supper, which we've already covered, is duplicating the marriage process, the wedding process. So God officially goes through all the stages, makes the ketubah of Israel, legally divorces, makes another ketubah, functions the same. I will be your God and you will be my people, but the ketubah contains the works of the cross. So actually the whole point of the cross for a Jewish person is, well, that's in the ketubah. Well, we're in the ketubah, yeah, but what does the Bible actually say? What you consider? It tells you that, you basically went away and didn't keep the vows, and then God divorced you, and then the exile happened. It's like, well, yeah, that happened, and then that's when Jesus came to repair that ketubah that you damaged. So that's why God had to act in the world. So actually, the whole point of that is when we begin to rediscover the Jewishness of what we believe in and of the gospel, we can then interact with the Jew from their perspective, and it makes more sense than what we believe in. So this is another question. Again, it's just a question. You can answer it how you want. We'll actually come back to this in a bit and fill in some blanks. Can we disconnect the old and new? No, because we disconnect the realities of the Messiah in a new. That's a simple comparison. So because the Torah and the Old Testament ketubah and the good news, the gospel, and the new ketubah, we see it so differently, then actually we're disconnecting. And what we're disconnecting really is the whole thing the Bible is saying, which is, going back to previous slides, about redemption, the redemption story. But it actually does fit together. So we just have to work out what we think still, how to fit it together, like what still works from the old, which we can apply to the new. So the wedding ceremony, definitely. Some of the Torah laws, no. Maybe not, because Jesus hasn't fulfilled them, and actually you can't do all the sacrifices anyway, because there is no temple. In fact, you can't actually sacrifice if you have a temple, because you need a red heifer, because people have died. So there are all these complicated things why if you're an adherent to Judaism, can't actually practice the law. And there's a whole bunch in between that we can debate. But the point is about understanding the whole thing. And that's the end of part 3, so it's a little bit longer than I wanted. So like parts 1 and 2, we're going to jump straight into part 3, like part 3 and 4 on separate, so there'll be no introduction. The point of having 4 videos rather than 2 is they're an hour long rather than 2 hours. So hop on to part 4, put a link. At some point I will get the slides up, but not at the moment. In this moment, in your moment. May well. See you in part 4.